Precedents. Since Washington was the first president, everything he and First Lady Martha Washington did became the start of a tradition, or a precedent. For example, Washington chose to be called Mr. President instead of Your Highness, Your Excellency, or Your High Mightiness. Yes, someone seriously suggested that. The first president. In early 1789, the states that had ratified the Constitution decided that an electoral college would meet and elect a president. George Washington was convinced to come out of retirement, and he received all the electoral votes. Washington is the only president to have ever won all of the electoral votes. According to the rules of the Constitution, the person with the second highest number of votes was the vice president. So John Adams became the first vice president. They were inaugurated on April 30th, 1789 in New York City, then the nation's temporary capital. The Cabinet. Congress created departments of the executive branch: the State Department to deal with other countries, the War Department to deal with the defense issues, the Treasury to deal with the economy, the Justice Department to deal with the administration of justice, and the Postal Service. Washington chose these people to head these departments: Henry Knox, a general from the Revolutionary War, as the Secretary of War; Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State; Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury; Edmund Randolph's Attorney General; Samuel Osgood, Postmaster General. As a group, these heads of departments were the Cabinet. The Cabinet, except the Postmaster, began to advise the president as they do today. The Judiciary Act of 1789. Article 3 of the Constitution, which established the judiciary branch, had few specifics about a federal court system, so Congress passed the Federal Judiciary Act of 1789. This established federal courts consisting of 13 district courts and 3 circuit courts of appeal. The states still maintained their own courts, but a federal court could overturn their decisions. The Supreme Court, the final federal court of appeals, would consist of 6 justices that were nominated by the president. President Washington nominated John Jay as the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Alexander Hamilton and the national economy. The new nation faced a huge war debt, with debts to foreign nations, individual citizens, and soldiers who'd been paid with bonds rather than cash. Alexander Hamilton proposed a 3-pronged solution in 1790. The U.S. would pay off all debts, including debts owed by states. Revenue would be generated by raising tariffs, which should also encourage people to buy American-made goods. A national bank would be established, owned jointly by the government and private investors, for the government to store money and make loans. A national mint would print paper money. Hamilton ran into opposition. The South had paid their few debts, so Congress saw Congress's decision as rewarding the North's failure to pay. The South opposed tariffs, which don't benefit an economy that doesn't rely on manufactured goods. People who lent money to the government in exchange for bonds often sold their bonds for cheap to speculators who would get a new profit. Speculators are people who buy items at a low price with the hope that their value will later increase and they can be sold at a profit. Some people argued that Congress didn't have the right to found a bank. Hamilton supported a loosely construction view of the Constitution, noting that the elastic clause of Article 1 gives Congress the authority to do what is necessary and proper to carry out its powers. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison favored a strict construction view of the Constitution, arguing that the necessary and proper clause put stronger limits on what was truly necessary. While Hamilton seemed to favor businessmen, Jefferson and Madison supported small farmers. While Hamilton advocated having a strong central government, Jefferson and Madison favored local and state governments. The disagreement between Hamiltonians and Jeffersonians over the scope and extent of federal powers laid the foundation for the first political parties in the United States. Partly by assuring Southern congressmen that the location of the nation's capital would move, Hamilton was able to convince them to accept his plan. Congress assumed the state's debts, enacted low tariffs, and established the Bank of the United States in 1791. The bank had a 20-year charter that would have to be renewed, and the states had the right to start their own banks. Washington had tried to stay neutral, but he did agree with Hamilton. Washington, D.C. New York was a large and bustling metropolis, but some worried that keeping the capital there favored Northern interests. A piece of land on the Potomac River between Maryland and Virginia, but part of neither state, was chosen as the site of a new capital. In 1790, the capital moved temporarily to Philadelphia, and in 1800, Washington, the District of Columbia, became the new capital. The Whiskey Rebellion. Alexander Hamilton also encouraged Congress to pass a tax on whiskey. In western Pennsylvania, farmers who grew the corn used to make the whiskey saw the tax as an attack. Many of them used whiskey as money. In the summer of 1794, farmers attacked tax collectors in the Whiskey Rebellion. That November, Washington personally led an army to stop the rebellion, and the farmers surrendered right away. Washington proved that the U.S. government was powerful and would use force if its people did not follow the law. The Whiskey Rebellion is the only time in U.S. history that a sitting president has personally commanded an army. The Treaty of Greenville. Native Americans in the Northwest Territory united to fight American expansion into their land, with the support of the British. After many initial successes but a final defeat, 12 tribes signed the 1795 Treaty of Greenville, ceding most of their land in the Northwest Territory to the United States. To cede means to yield or formally surrender. The Neutrality Proclamation. In 1789, when the French Revolution began, Americans were supportive of a revolution that seemed similar in spirit to their own. But the French Revolution turned bloody and violent, a period that came to be known as the Reign of Terror, and war broke out between the French and other European nations. Jefferson felt that the United States shouldn't abandon its ally France. Its people were fighting for liberty. Hamilton thought it was more important for the United States to protect relations with Britain, its biggest trading partner. On April 22, 1793, Washington issued the Neutrality Proclamation. Americans wouldn't fight or help either side, and foreign warships couldn't use American ports. Madison argued that only Congress had the authority over foreign affairs, and Jefferson resigned as Secretary of State. Impressment and Jay's Treaty. The British kidnapped American ships that traded in the French West Indies and forced the American sailors to fight for Britain. This practice, called impressment of seamen, pushed the U.S. closer to another war with England. Washington sent Chief Justice John Jay to England to discuss the seized U.S. ships. In 1795, Jay was able to get the British to agree to pay for the losses. Jay's treaty prevented another war with Britain and also improved trade between the countries, withdrew British troops from Western outposts in the United States, established commissions to settle border disputes. Washington's farewell. Concerned that he had too much power for one man and overdue for retirement, George Washington announced in 1796 that he wouldn't be running for a third term. He could have run. There wasn't any precedent yet about how many terms a president got. In his farewell address, Washington warned against forming political parties, factions, or permanent alliances with foreign nations. A faction is a group that shares a common goal or belief. Political parties form. The disagreements with Jefferson and Madison on one side and Hamilton on the other grew into the first full-fledged parties in American politics. The Democratic-Republican Party, Jefferson and Madison, supported the ideas of republicanism, or the modern-day Republican Party, including strict construction view of the Constitution, reliance on agriculture, the ideal of a nation of small farmers, and sympathy for the French. The Democratic-Republican Party was favored in the South and on the western frontier. The Democratic-Republican Party was also just called the Republican Party. It's not related to today's Republican Party. It actually eventually evolved into today's Democratic Party. The Federalist Party, Hamilton, was named after those who had supported the Constitution from the beginning. This party supported a strong central representative government, a loose construction view of the Constitution, reliance on trade, especially with England, and the importance of urban merchants. Most Federalists did business and lived in the urban areas of New England. The election of 1796. The Democratic Republicans chose Thomas Jefferson to run for president and Aaron Burr to run for vice president at a caucus. A caucus is a meeting of party leaders to select candidates. The Federalists chose John Adams and Charles Pinckney. Adams received the most electoral votes and became president. Jefferson, the runner-up, became vice president. Adams got 71 votes, Jefferson 68, so it was a very close election, and Jefferson and Adams were former friends who became bitter rivals. The XYZ Affair. France began attacking American ships as England had. In 1797, President Adams sent Charles Pinckney, Elbridge Gerry, and John Marshall to Paris to negotiate. The French foreign minister, Talleyrand, refused to meet. Instead, Talleyrand sent 3 agents to discuss a treaty for a huge bribe. Adams was furious. Referring to the agents as Agent X, Agent Y, and Agent Z, he urged Congress to prepare for war. This insult outraged Americans and led to the slogan, "Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute." Congress expanded the Navy, but Adams didn't really want war, and Adams today is considered to be the father of the American Navy. The Alien and Sedition Acts. American citizens were now wary of new European immigrants who might side with the French. Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. These controversial laws allowed the president to deport or imprison immigrants in wartime. They also made sedition, which is rebellion against the government, illegal, taking away basic civil liberties such as freedom of speech and freedom of the press. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Democratic Republicans thought the Alien and Sedition Acts were an abuse of power. Jefferson wrote a resolution for the Kentucky legislature in 1798, and Madison wrote one for Virginia in 1799, although the authorship was kept secret. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions argued that the acts were unconstitutional because they interfered with constitutional rights granted to states. The Kentucky resolution insisted that states could nullify laws they found unconstitutional. The resolutions didn't change the law. Congress just let the acts expire after Adams left office, but they showed that states could challenge the federal government. To nullify means to cancel or to make void. The Convention of 1800. In 1800, Adams sent another set of delegates to Paris. In the Convention of 1800, France agreed to stop naval attacks. Adams was pleased, but many Federalists from his own party had wanted a war. And ever since the Alien and Sedition Acts, the Democratic Republicans saw Adams as an enemy to their cause. When election season rolled around, Adams was in a bad position for re-election.